Ottawa, Canada's capital. It's the Computer Podcast. I'm your host, Norman Jack. With me today, my co-host, George Valenzuela, as usual. George, how are you keeping?
I'm doing great, Norm. How are you?
Not too bad at all. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about interesting security developments in Hong Kong in light of that country's accession to Chinese law regarding to security and what that's doing to the internet. We'll also be talking about Twitter and Donald Trump going at loggerheads over tweets and what should be in those tweets. And of course, because it's the first show of the month, we'll be using our Tech Talk series to continue as well. We'll be taking your questions and trying to solve your problems. To help us with that, joining us, of course, our special guest, Paul Middleveen. Paul, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me. Wonderful to be here.
Interesting story out of Beijing last week. It's actually out of Hong Kong, probably a better way of mentioning it. Of course, China's parliament met last week and rubber-stamped a new security proposal. They want to draft a new security law that would apply to Hong Kong. Now, you'd think Hong Kong is now part of China, so that should be okay. But you've got to remember that in 1997, when the British handed over control of Hong Kong back to China, China agreed to 50 years of what is called one country, two systems, which basically meant that many of the laws and protections in place under British rule remained in place for at least 50 years. Now, critics, including the Canadian government, the U.S. government, the British government, the Australian government, many other countries, are saying that imposing Chinese security laws in Hong Kong will breach that agreement. Essentially, it gives permission for Chinese security agents to operate in Hong Kong as they do in the rest of China. Now, this, of course, being that Hong Kongers are generally pretty savvy people, brought an absolutely enormous increase in inquiries for VPNs, or virtual private networks. Now, George, those are the networks, I guess, that can sort of hide where you are from the internet, correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's meant to obfuscate the exit point of your IP address. So you connect in one location, everything gets encrypted and hidden, and then you reappear magically somewhere other than where you geographically are located. It should be fairly difficult to trace to find out where you are. Of course, that all depends on what VPN you're using. Some VPN operators have no scruples, right? So they'll take those logs and they can connect the dots and say, well, user A is emerging here, but is connecting from Hong Kong. So as long as you can trust the VPN provider, it's a pretty effective and efficient way of essentially bypassing any security where you are and hiding exactly where you're located geographically.
Well, a company called Atlas VPN says that the inquiries, once this law was announced, increased threefold in one day. And Google data shows that searches from the Hong Kong area for the term VPN increased 1,680% in just one day as well. So people out there are worried. Yeah, exactly. 1,600. That's like, oh my gosh, what is that? Like 100 times, 168 times greater than the number that they had before this law was announced. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that develops and how seriously Chinese security agencies try to crack down. Of course, there have been protests and pro-democracy protests and demonstrations continuing in Hong Kong. That's been a thorn in the side of the central Chinese government for a couple of years now anyway.
I think we've seen that the Chinese government has lots of very capable security experts working for it. So it will be a challenge either way, yeah.
Well, Donald Trump and Twitter are going at it like crazy after some interesting developments last week. It all began when the President of the United States tweeted out two subsequent tweets all about the threat of massive fraud if mail-in ballots are allowed in the presidential election and other elections coming up this fall in the United States. Well, Twitter jumped on it and posted a warning saying maybe people should check their facts, and connected that warning to links of all sorts of research articles and news stories, basically saying that there is no evidence of any massive or large-scale or even medium-scale voter fraud in the United States when the ballots are mailed in. Well, that got his ire because the very next day he issued an executive order that orders the U.S. Justice Department to try to find ways around a 1997 law that protects companies like Twitter and Facebook and others from being sued for content posted on their social media platforms. This is why people like Mark Zuckerberg can say, we don't have to check for factual information or to make sure that the posts are true because, well, that's not our job. Really, what it means is we can't be sued anyway, so why reduce our popularity? A lot of constitutional experts are saying this really doesn't have a leg to stand on, but of course it will involve lots of fights, and Trump saying, of course, that this is a move against conservative voices in the United States. Well, a day later, Twitter doubled down on it when the president posted a tweet about the riots occurring in Minneapolis, that following the death of a black man who was arrested on suspicion of passing a bad check. He died after a police officer spent at least 8 minutes kneeling on his neck after he was handcuffed. Well, the president tweeted that the state government has the backing of the U.S. federal government, and the feds could take control of Minneapolis if the situation deteriorates. And then he posted the line, when the looting begins, the shooting begins. And that line touched off a query from Twitter. They posted on his page that maybe people should not look at this particular one because it contained erroneous information and violated their policy against promoting violence. So I guess the ball's back in the president's court, and we'll see what happens with that in the next couple of weeks. Okay, it's our monthly Tech Talk show. This is the chance for you to email in your questions and problems that you may be having, and we'll try and solve them for you. We've got a couple of emails here that are talking about some problems serious, some problems maybe not so serious. Let's see, I've got one here from George. No, it's not our George, because George knows everything, and it's not from him. It's from another George. He says, I want to increase the capacity of my laptop and swap out hard drives. Are these USB-connected docking stations any good? Do they operate fast enough these days to be able to be useful?
Yeah, the docks are great. They're using USB 3 on all the newest docks. You're going to get really fast data transfer speeds. But it will only give you extra storage when you plug one of those in to your dock and you have your notebook docked in place. So if you do want to change the hard drive within the system, there's many different ways you can go about doing that. But one is buying your drive or bringing it into the shop here and using a piece of software such as Acronis to allow you to clone the drive over to your brand new drive that you've purchased. So definitely you can increase the capacity inside your computer. But if you do mainly work out of the home or office, you can always have your data and also have it separate and physically separate from the notebook. So your data is a little more secure that way too.
Now tell me, are these docking stations fast enough with USB 3 and maybe even USB 2 to actually, say play a video or something like that if you've got a movie stored on a hard drive?
Definitely. USB 3 for sure. 2, you're going to be pushing it. Depends on the quality of the video. I would recommend going with a USB 3 device. But for your lower quality videos, USB 2 should work fine as well.
Well, it also depends on the software you're using. If your you can set to read ahead and buffer a certain amount in memory, so it will kind of offset a little bit any speed bumps that you're going through. But if you're trying to do other things at the same time, reading emails, downloading a file, then you're in trouble. So stick with single-use purpose if you've got a slower throughput.
Okay. Now, Paul, you've got a question about somebody whose webcam doesn't seem to be working properly.
Yeah, we had a few calls over the last month or two, and usually it was a relatively easy fix. People would run into, they're trying to do their Zoom meeting or using Office, whatever package they happen to be using to do their conferencing with. But when they go to open the application, it's saying that their webcam is not there or is locked in use. And a lot of times when you purchase a system with your camera, it'll have software integrated into the operating system already, and some automatically lock themselves onto the camera, like the software has already attached itself to the camera and is ready to go. So you may want to disable that. Check and see if you have any solution software that came with the branded computer, and disable all other webcam software devices. So at least you're only using the one application you need to. And of course, if you've been using your computer for a long period of time, sometimes there's a lot of cache or other things in there that might not allow something to work. So give your computer a quick reboot. Make sure you only have the one app open and everything should be working.
Okay, so that's cache, C-A-C-H-E, and not C-A-S-H, right?
Yes, indeed.
I wish I had a lot of cache in my computer, I tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess particularly that's a problem too if you happen to be using a laptop and you've got a built-in camera and you want to use a better camera maybe or relocate it to an external version here. You've got to make sure that the webcam that's already on your laptop isn't already operating. Otherwise, you're going to have problems getting that other webcam up and running.
Yeah, which one it's going to sync to. Absolutely.
Okay, here's another question for you. This is from Jillian. What kind of cleaner should I be using to clean off my computer screen? It was so much easier in the old CRT days, when we had glass on the front. You could just turn it off and let the static die away and then go at it with a
Windex
cleaner for your glasses or Windex or something like that.
Windex works great.
Yeah, it's a
Not
lot
anymore.
No, it's a lot more
don't do it.
difficult now, I guess, Paul?
Well, I'm sure George will contest that, all the newer screens and the films and technologies that they build into them or coat them with, you don't want to use an abrasive or corrosive cleaner such as Windexes and stuff. You don't want anything with ammonia or bleaches in it.
Right.
There is a lot of cleaners out there that you can buy. And of course, just like with your glasses, you want to use just basically a nice soft microfiber cloth. Spray the cleaning if you can. If it's really dirty, spray it on the screen, but I'd recommend spraying it onto the cloth and then wiping the screen down. That works great. We have packages in the store, nice and cheap if anybody needs stuff like that. But yeah, microfiber cloth and a proper cleaning solution with no corrosive or abrasive chemicals such as ammonias.
I guess one of the important things too is to make sure your computer's off.
Yes, that is always a good thing. Yeah, I would definitely cleaning your computer. You always want to make sure there's no power going to it just in case something happens.
I've got a shop bag full of microfiber cloths. I just went to Canadian Tire. I go like once a year and I just buy a fresh new bag and kind of recycle them out. And I've got a bottle of rubbing alcohol that I was lucky enough to find during this lockdown. And occasionally I'll go over it with a little bit of alcohol as well, especially my laptop, because it does, it has been out to the office and back and so on. So I give it a little light rub down, just damp cloth. Don't pour anything directly onto any electronics ever, obviously. And bonus for the pandemic edition, I do the same thing with my phone. Take off the case, get a little microfiber cloth with a little bit of alcohol on it and just kind of rub the surface, rub the sides, rub the back, rub the case, put the case back on, after everything's been dried off. And it's a nice way of cleaning / sanitizing at the same time. So I do my phone once a week because it goes with me in my pocket when I go shopping, for example, or whatever. So I always make sure I kind of wipe that down once a week.
It's good you mentioned the antibacterial part of it there too. The alcohol will work great to clean surfaces, but you definitely want to look for. There's a lot of cloths out there with an antibacterial agent in them, and the sprays as well. We carry one called Whoosh in our store. They have a whole variety of cleaners, so be looking for those over the next couple of weeks in the store.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you both suggest microfiber cloths, and I think a lot of people will say, well, why not just a regular cloth? But microfiber, by definition, seems to pick up the dirt a lot better because of those microfibers. It seems to be able to help scrape away very softly the dirt and the buildup that is on your screen or on your keyboard or on anything else for that matter.
Yeah, and if you compare it to like a traditional paper towel, right? If you look with a microscope at a paper towel, it's little tiny fibers of cellulose in there, right? So it's like essentially wood fibers, and that does become an abrasive, exactly. So if you want to maintain the lifetime, and it's just your phones and everything it's all tough, supposed to be Gorilla Glass and so on. But if you're sitting there rubbing it with something, you're going to leave scratches on there. So even your glasses, right? Use a microfiber cloth. They're available anywhere, and I think there are nanofiber cloths now available as well. So you can even go further down the scale, and it just it does a better job of being non-abrasive. And as you say, Norm, it seems to have some extra absorbency because of the size of the fibers. Yeah.
Now, Paul, you've had some customers calling in recently with issues ranging from sound and network connectivity, user profile issues. That's kind of important these days when so many people are working from home. You've got to be able to get connected to your network. And, if you're holding Zoom meetings or something like that, you've got to be able to be heard.
Yes. At first we were getting the calls. We were trying to diagnose it remotely. Some of the customers were bringing them into the shop and having us look at them. But as we investigated it, all these issues seem to be coming from some of the newest Windows update releases that were done in May. I believe they were released towards the beginning of May. One particular update, which we'll post, is KB 4556799. Not that that means anything to anybody, but essentially they did a lot of optimization. Like when we were looking into that update, there is optimizations to audio and networking. Most people are okay. Most people, these updates are going through, but there are various branded machines out there, a certain component, a certain piece of hardware that just doesn't get along with this update, and your sound will completely stop. We tried uninstalling and reinstalling audio drivers, changing settings with no success. The unfortunate thing was the only thing that we could do to get it to work was to remove that Windows update. So we've deferred those clients' updates to a few weeks because you can't delay them, unfortunately, either.
Yeah.
But as I said, for most people, it's working. So if you do find you are having some connectivity issues, or all of a sudden your network goes down and you just did some Windows updates, try and go back into your restore points and go back to a previous restore point. That should uninstall the current update. If not, also try and click on your control panel programs and features. Programs and features. And on the left-hand side, there will be a link where you can click to view Windows updates. Then you'll be able to see that update in the list. You should be able to uninstall it. If that doesn't work for you, well, bring it into the shop and we'll take care of it for you.
Now, here's a question, though. Is Windows aware of situations like this enough that they're going to be trying to fix that and pushing out another update to the update?
That is a very good question. When we were checking it out on the Microsoft website and support forums, they're not necessarily mentioning they're aware of these issues, but they are stating that they're aware that people are having issues, not necessarily with a particular update, and that they're working very hard during these times to fix people's issues. But they're not specifically saying that this update has an issue.
That would be an admission that maybe the update was pushed out too quickly, but
yeah. Well, checking articles, various articles like in tech forums and whatnot, there are other people around the world that are having issues with these updates as well. So at least it's just the few and not the many, but let's hope they get it fixed.
That's for sure. Okay, well, that's all the time we've got for the show today. My thanks to Paul Middleveen from the Trailing Edge, tte.ca here in Ottawa. Paul, you have a good week.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and we'll see you next week, George.
See you, Norm.
And we'll see you next week here on the Computer Podcast. Interesting programming.